Asked AI.
Gender ideology is a set of beliefs that hold that gender is a social construct, rather than a biological reality. It asserts that there are multiple genders, which are not fixed and can change throughout a person's life. Gender ideology also rejects the traditional binary view of gender, male, female, and instead posits a spectrum of genders. Gender ideology has become increasingly popular in recent years, particularly among young people. It has been promoted by a variety of institutions, including schools, universities, and the media. However, gender ideology has also been criticized by a number of individuals and organizations. Critics argue that gender ideology is harmful to children, as it can lead to gender confusion and identity distress. They also argue that gender ideology undermines the traditional family structure and promotes promiscuity. It is harmful to children. Critics argue that gender ideology can lead to gender confusion and identity distress in children. They point to the increasing number of children who are being identified as transgender as evidence of this. It undermines the traditional family structure. Critics argue that gender ideology undermines the traditional family structure by promoting the idea that there are multiple genders and that gender is fluid. They argue that this can lead to children rejecting their biological sex and their parents' traditional gender roles. It promotes promiscuity. Critics argue that gender ideology promotes promiscuity by encouraging people to explore their sexuality and to have sex with multiple partners. They argue that this can lead to a breakdown of social order and a rise in sexually transmitted infections. It is based on flawed science. Critics argue that gender ideology is not supported by scientific evidence. They point to studies that have shown that there is a biological basis for sex and gender. It is a form of child abuse. Critics argue that gender ideology is a form of child abuse because it can lead to children rejecting their biological sex and their parents' traditional gender roles. They argue that this can cause children harm in the long term. It is divisive. Critics argue that gender ideology is divisive because it pits people against each other based on their gender identity. They argue that this can lead to social conflict and violence. It is totalitarian. Critics argue that gender ideology is totalitarian because it seeks to impose a single worldview on everyone. They argue that this is incompatible with freedom of thought and expression. Gender ideology is a complex and controversial topic. There are valid arguments to be made both for and against it. It is important to weigh the evidence carefully before forming an opinion on the matter. It is also important to note that gender ideology is a spectrum of beliefs. There is no one monolithic gender ideology. Some people who identify as gender ideologists may hold more extreme views, while others may hold more moderate views. Ultimately, it is up to each individual to decide what they believe about gender ideology. It is important to be respectful of other people's beliefs, even if you disagree with them. What do you think? Write it in the comments. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.